So by now in this mini course, you have said that you want to work on a transaction, you've been assigned a transaction, you have a rough idea of what you need to do in that, taking a brief look at the protobufs, a brief look at the requirements. You have a brief understanding that you need to create examples, the class, the tests, all of those things. So today, in this video now, we're going to look at a little bit more detail of how to interpret the protobufs and what this means for the code more precisely. I'm going to use an example of token dissociate, and I'm going to start with the Hiero version, which I think is like a good workflow. Look at this document, which explains in kind of this nice visual format what's required. And then we will take a look at the token dissociate proto in more detail. I will try and explain what this means for the code of the examples, the transaction, the tests. Remember, you can find each of these when you click into the issues of token dissociate transaction. The documentation here is really helpful to tell you about these, and I'm just looking at the Hiero docs, the Hiero protobufs. All right, so let's read this section and let's discuss what we find. So I'll give you a couple minutes to read that. Okay, so token dissociate, it dissociates the Hiero account from the provided Hiero token. This is the first important thing to understand. What is token dissociate? So based on this, you have previously agreed to possibly receive a token, and now you are banning that agreement, you're revoking that agreement, you're saying, no, I don't want to have any involvement with that token anymore. And this is a transaction that you see here. It has to be signed. Transaction must be signed by the provided account's key. These keys technically, they've got public keys and they have private keys. So this is a little bit ambiguous what it's referring to, which is again why you want to look at the protobufs exactly. Another aspect that's a little bit ambiguous is, okay, what exactly is the account? So is it like the user's account? Is it like the token's account? Yeah, so again, look at the protobufs for like confirmation. They're usually clearer. It is difficult sometimes because the words used to describe a certain key can change in the documentation based on the context. What it means in this context is this is a user that doesn't want to do that token ID anymore, their key. Okay, so then it tells you once the association is removed, no token related operation can be performed on that account. So all these details are important to also see, because when you are creating test files, you need to make sure essentially that you can't then try and transfer a token from this account if the token transaction, dissociate transaction, was already done before. So for example, if you were looking at the test file, try and find it again, test.py, you will see here that there is some attention to detail of the order or the sequence with these transactions. Here, actually, token dissociate hasn't been pulled into that, but for example, I wouldn't be able to just add token dissociate here if token dissociate if I were going to transfer tokens with that same account. I'm not sure here if it is the same account, but the sequence of that really matters when you are conducting these tests. So in order to be able to create good tests and everything working correctly, you will need to pay attention to even the details like this. Okay, so all of that is like, I guess, a little bit overwhelming in the beginning because there's a lot of requirements. But at least the requirements are like fairly clear. And if you look at the protobuf, they're even more clear. And even if you forget some of the details or you miss some of the details, the Hiero network will give you pretty immediate feedback when you try and push something through solo. When you get it wrong, you forget it. So it's not the end of the world to like miss any of these details, at least in the development process. The testing should be able to iron out most of the kinks. Yeah, okay, so moving on. If the provided account is not found, the transaction will resolve to invalid account ID. If it's been deleted, you get account deleted, and all of these things. So what this tells you here is that these are like the error messages. So if you try and dissociate a transaction, but your account ID that you typed in was like something that isn't recognizable by the Hiero network, then it can't dissociate the tokens from that account. It doesn't know how to interpret that account. So we need to create an error. And that is telling you here that the particular error that is going to be created is invalid account ID. So ideally, when you create the token dissociate code, you will try and create the unit tests that will prevent you or ensure you get error messages for these scenarios before you actually push it to the network, the solo network test. So all these scenarios, let's say, if the account's been deleted, if the token isn't found, if the association doesn't exist, all of these are like, let's say, like technical requirements that should ideally be tested locally. So in the token, let's say token associate example, so I'm looking for a test. You'll see Nadine is testing for various scenarios. So it's testing that, the user forgot to specify an account ID, testing that the signing is in a certain kind of way. So ideally, these aspects, and then maybe there's more, but I don't know, sometimes it's not organized by that, but these requirements should be tested. If you're doing like a mini SDK version of token dissociate, I think the most important thing is just to kind of get the transaction through to the network, assuming you have valid fields. But eventually, I think that these, to fully align with the protobuf, these probably will have to be, these don't have to be added, I think, because the network will reject it anyway. But these things would be like nice to have in the test file for the Python SDK for each transaction, in my opinion. Okay, so these are like the requirements. There's also some other requirements. So you see here that you have to be able to sign it in such a way. So you have to sign it with the key of the user that's trying to dissociate it. And you also have to sign it. So you have to sign it twice. You have to sign it with the account that's paying for the transaction key. They might not necessarily be the same account. And the way that it's been handled so far with the Python SDK, remember that I told you that we created mocks for the code. So tests, conf test here, we're creating mocks. This is where sometimes like the vocab changes. But we're pulling values from this. And then you can see that we right now are using like a sender, a recipient. You could always label that later on in your code as, okay, I'm going to call this the admin account. Sorry, what was it called here? The user account and the payer account. You can make them different. I think in some cases you could probably make them the same. So let's see how it's been done in the case of token associate, because we don't have the dissociate example just yet. So here Nadine is creating a test for the signing of the transaction. And what we learned, oh dear, I shouldn't show you token dissociate. Okay, token dissociate would require the key, the user key, and the payer key. I'm assuming the token associate is something similar, but I don't know. Let's have a look. So in this case, we have the signature of the private key and that, yeah, because the private key in the mock file that I showed you where we created these new but fake data, we didn't have a actual private key, so you need to create this kind of magic mock private key. It's not really like a real private key, but we're creating it for testing purposes. So you're signing with this private key to be able to do this transaction. You should also see it like in the examples file, where the requirements for the token associate are clear there. So here you can see, right, not only are you requiring a token ID and the recipient of who is receiving this association, but you will also require the signing of the recipient key. For token dissociate, we will require two signings, the key of the account and the payer account key. So these are just things to watch out for when you are looking to create the examples file, the SRC, the tests files. You'll need to really, really get clear on the protobufs to be able to like be accurate and be comprehensive with it. Also pay attention to the exact sort of format or the calls to particular things. This section here is useful, but not that useful in the sense that these are just examples of existing SDKs and how they are requiring you to interact, but it could be interesting to take a look at it anyway to just see, just confirm your views. If, for example, we thought, okay, it's going to require an account ID and it's going to require a token ID to be able to dissociate a transaction. And you're also going to have to sign with the private key. So here they're doing some kind of signing. If you're familiar with JavaScript, you can see that too, you're signing. So maybe you can use this as kind of like a confirmation, but you have to write this sort of in Python yourself. So I personally think this is like more user-friendly, but then you need to look at the raw protobuf data. It'll tell you more accurately. So like all the tests that you have to create and all the logic that you have to create in the underlying test files to make sure that the transaction will actually work. And then it will tell you more accurately like the exact format required to be able to create the token and the account ID. So for example, I can't just write the name of a particular token for the transaction to actually work. it has to be a list, it has to be a valid token ID. So this tells me clearly exactly the format that I need to create the data to be in. The same with the account ID. There are some transactions where this has been more complicated. So I think, like, for example, with token delete, token yeah, okay, so I don't know, there's sometimes quite a little bit of digging because the protobuf I think tells you like the requirements for that particular transaction, but sometimes you have questions about like the format of a particular subtype of that, and you need to keep kind of drilling through. So I remember when I was creating token delete transaction, I needed to have an admin key, but I did I have to be careful with the admin key. It's a private key. I can't just put it in the transaction in a certain way. I need to be careful with it to not reveal like the private key. So all of these requirements, yeah, I think this file is quite good. Anyway, so hopefully that sort of summarizes the important things to look out for in a in the documentation and in the protobuf to be able to guide the format of how you would do the examples, guide the format of like your test files or the things that you have to look for, the testing requirements, and guide the format of like what eventually determines whether your transaction will work. This protobuf is a crucial thing. So yeah, this is the key thing for it to be successful. In the next videos, we're going to look at the examples, the classes, the tests, file by file, kind of in more detail, talking about the prior examples, and seeing a little bit more about how that is done. Again, I am not an expert by far at these. I was just showing a little bit of wisdom that kind of tries to pull these things together. So you might have to do a little bit more research into it too.